Ladies and gentlemen, in order to recognize demonstrated leadership in one's chosen profession, appointed or elected position that is clearly exemplary and worthy of emulation, the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation established the John A. LeJejune Award for Exemplary Leadership. Recognition is made in the form of a statuette of John A. LeJejune, provided by founder and board member Patrick Brent. The recipient must epitomize the core values of honor, courage, and commitment, and practice the leadership traits and principles ascribed to by the United States Marine Corps. The 2012 recipient of the John A. LeJejune Award for Exemplary Leadership is Mr. Timothy T. Day, Chairman and CEO of Bar S Foods Company. Mr. Day joined the Marine Corps in 1956 and served on active duty from 1959 to 1962. He was honorably discharged in 1970, having attained the rank of captain. The experience left an indelible mark that would help him become the man he is today. Through the generosity of Mr. and Mrs. Day and the Timothy T. Day Foundation, many Marines have and will be touched through a variety of contributions and projects. These include long-term support to the Injured Marine Semper Fi Fund since 2004. The Timothy T. Day Foundation has recently started the Tim and Sandy Day Canine Companions, which provides service dogs and related care to Marines in need. The Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation has benefited from their generosity since 2005. Their foundation has recently started the Day Scholars Program, which provides educational assistance to outstanding college juniors and seniors and will include a pilot mentoring program. The Marine Corps University Foundation has also benefited since 2005. Marine Corps Fellowships at Harvard Business School, where the foundation has 2 ongoing programs. The Marine Corps Entrepreneur Fellowship, which was started in 2005 to provide financial support to distinguished MBA students who had demonstrated hands-on leadership as Marine officers, particularly those who have been deployed in war zones and have served in combat operations. And the Marine Corps Executive Education Fellowship was started here recently in 2011 to sponsor career officers who have demonstrated exceptional past leadership to the Advanced Management Program, particularly those who have served, again, in combat operations and who are recognized as having great potential as future leaders of our Corps. Lastly, Mr. Day became a founder of the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation in 2002. The Semper Fidelis Memorial Chapel here on the grounds of the Marine Corps Heritage Center and the cornerstone and key element of our Semper Fidelis Memorial Park was made possible by a $5 million grant from Tim and Sandy Day and the Timothy T. Day Foundation. General Amos and General Boomer, I ask you to join me on the stage to make this award. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Timothy T. Day.
Well, thank you. I'm deeply honored by this John A. LeJejune Award because it comes from such an esteemed organization as the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation and bears the name of a Marine often referred to as the greatest of all leathernecks. His words still echo throughout the Corps each November 10th as the famous birthday order is read. And I am obviously awed and humbled by this setting and the presence of such distinguished individuals as the Commandant and the First Lady of the Marine Corps and so many other distinguished individuals too numerous to name, as well as many of our fellowship recipients over at that table and family and friends. Your presence here tonight will make this an evening that I will always treasure. And I, too, would like to offer my personal congratulations to others who were recognized earlier this evening. Your contributions to our nation and to the Corps are most commendable. General Blackman mentioned that I was one of the early founders of the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, and as such, I had the opportunity to consider a wide range of projects for possible funding, and we proudly chose the terroir exhibit over there as our first funding effort. Although relatively unfamiliar to many Americans, I think everyone in this room knows that it was one of the most difficult and bloodiest amphibious landings in the Pacific during World War II, resulting in over 3,000 Marine casualties in just 76 hours in November 1943. And the incredible valor displayed during that truly brutal fight led to 4 Medal of Honor and 46 Navy Cross recipients. To me, as a young officer half a century ago, it always epitomized the indomitable spirit of the Corps and the will to prevail in the face of extreme adversity. And I can't help, whenever I think of Tarawa, I can't help but recall the actions of Medal of Honor recipient Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins and how he climbed that Beddoe Pier under withering fire and personally led his men in assaults that took out numerous gun emplacements that were killing brother Marines as they waded ashore. And his conduct has always stood out to me as an inspirational example of visible leadership at a critical moment that helped turn the tide of battle. I recently have read several books by Carl Marlanus, a highly decorated Marine officer and noted author. One was Matterhorn and the other was What It's Like to Go to War. And in both of those books, he specifically references some leadership advice by a popular red-headed major who taught tactics at the basic school at that point in time. And apparently the major was addressing a class of young lieutenants near graduation who had been extensively trained as platoon commanders and who were anxious to get to the fleet and assume those duties. I think many of us can identify with that. And the major said, in essence, when you get your platoons, they will undoubtedly be staffed with highly qualified and experienced NCOs who are perfectly capable of handling most of the normal leadership duties of the unit. So in a sense, you'll be kind of redundant. But a time will come when you lieutenants are going to earn every penny of your pay. And when those critical moments arrive, you will definitely know it. Well, sometime thereafter, Lieutenant Marlanus was deployed to Vietnam, and one day his platoon was climbing a hill on a mission to seek out and destroy NVA positions when suddenly they came under intense machine gun fire from emplacements up on the hill. And the unit was pinned down, men hugging the dirt. And Lieutenant Marlanus quickly realized that he had to get the troops up and moving on the attack, or they were going to take heavy casualties, perhaps be wiped out. He also understood at that moment that this was one of those critical moments the Major had been referring to. And so he turned to Marines nearby and told them to lay down covering fire, and then he stood up in the face of flying metal and started advancing up that hill, running in a zigzagging manner, and personally led an assault that took out 4 enemy bunkers, according to his Navy Cross citation. Kind of reminiscent of Lieutenant Hawkins at Tarawa in my mind. And history shows that Marines will follow this type of visible leadership. They will get up, move on the attack, and seize the objective. And Lieutenant Morlanes acknowledges that he was only alone for a moment or two, and when he glanced back, his Marines were right there with him. Well, leaders of any sizable organization in the private sector or public sector of our nation from time to time face such critical moments, usually related to some form of crisis or extraordinary challenge or maybe even a unique opportunity. Of course, these critical moments don't involve the danger or physical demands of combat, but they are nonetheless critical moments pertaining to mission achievement, perhaps financial risk, perhaps the very survival of an enterprise. And as such, they demand conspicuous leadership because the actions, attitude, bearing, conduct, demeanor of a highly visible individual can have an enormous influence on the performance of that organization in overcoming adversity or perhaps advancing and continuing to seize an objective. I have had to face, in my rather lengthy professional career, quite a few of such critical moments. 2 quickly come to mind. One was dealing with a massive disruption, I should say, to our supply chain when a tornado hit one of our manufacturing facilities in Oklahoma. And the second was coping with the marketplace and the financial chaos related to a nationwide product recall because of a possible food safety issue. Really a food executive's worst nightmare. And fortunately, I had the benefit of unparalleled leadership training provided by the Marine Corps that was deeply ingrained in me at a young age. And that training, plus the very experience of having served as a Marine officer, were invaluable to my personal development, and I think had a very direct bearing on how our organization at Barr's Foods Company dealt with some pretty difficult situations over the years. Well, as I stand before you tonight, I sense another critical moment, although it's quite different than any I've ever faced in the past. And I'd like to ask my wife Sandy to come join me, because this particular critical moment is shared with her and with the board of our foundation, who I'd like to briefly introduce. First is Dick Mowry, who's been my personal advisor for over 20 years. Stacy Tucker runs our family office. Eric Gleason's my oldest son. Leslie Palello is my daughter. Tim Jr. is my namesake, and Brian Day is my youngest son. Well, the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation has done an incredible job in designing, construction, and creating this beautiful facility that proudly displays our wonderful heritage. And to the untrained eye, this appears to be the finished product. The unfortunate reality is that we still have quite a ways to go to reach completion. From the very beginning, the architectural design, the master plan, contemplated another major building phase, now called the final phase, to fulfill the vision of this museum. If you'll note that there are, other than a rather small photographic gallery behind me, there are no galleries or major exhibits portraying the post-Vietnam era. Yet for all Marines alive today, this is a very important time frame, often involving deep personal memories. Many of these leathernecks, including virtually everyone in this room in uniform, help forge history that embodies Beirut, Grenada, Panama, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and about close to 10 years of continuous combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's really during the most recent decade or so that our legendary warrior ethos was combined with advanced technology in a transformative process to create what is now often referred to as the modern Marine Corps, with war-fighting capabilities that are revered by military forces around the world. Well, General Boomer and General Blackman and everyone who has been associated with the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, they've been working diligently to raise the necessary capital, but it's a massive sum. It's something over $60 million, I'm told, to expand this facility and to pay proper tribute to this most current era of our history. Well, I think many of us recognize that raising such a large amount of money in this current economic environment is an extraordinarily difficult assignment, truly daunting challenge. And to us, it appears that this is a critical moment when visible financial leadership is essential to further energize this campaign, to stimulate greater momentum, to fund the final phase of the National Museum of the Marine Corps. And so tonight, Sandy and I and the board of our foundation, we're standing up and facing that challenge, and we're making a $12 million commitment to that effort. Thank you. The new overlook site is the first that we walked today, is the first installment of that gift. And we have here a copy of our board resolution signed by every director of our foundation documenting that commitment, and perhaps you would like to give that to General Blackman. And if history is any guide, my fellow founders of the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation and countless Marines around the world who are dedicated to preserving our legacy and our great heritage, they're going to follow this lead. They're going to stand up and they're going to help us finish this magnificent museum. Our intent is to put that final phase front and center, with the hope that in the not too distant future that the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation will be able to say, proudly proclaim, the Marines have landed, the beachhead is secure, the final objective is in sight, and victory is assured. Thank you again for this highly coveted John A. LeJejune Award. I will try to be worthy of it. Semper Fidelis.
For those of you that know me well, I am rarely at a loss for words. I am at a loss for words. Tim and Sandy, thank you. There's not much more I can say, but thank you. Thank you for your absolutely extraordinary leadership, your support, your commitment, and your friendship. Thank you. Rarely does this gentleman fall into the it's a tough act to follow, but perhaps that's the situation tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, our military guest of honor this evening is the 35th Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, General Jim Amos.
Rusty, that may be the most profound statement you've ever made in your life. Tim, thank you. Thank you to you and Sandy. You know, I sit around and look at this national treasure. When I was at Quantico as the CG, we were here when the ground was broken, and we were here on November the 10th for the president when we cut the ribbon right out here. Very exciting. So I would get down here fairly often, and lately it's not nearly often enough because when I come now it's like hitting the refresh button on a computer. I come in, we drove in tonight, Bonnie and I were talking, and I looked at this building from a distance and I just said, God, it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, it's around Christmas. What you have built here, you and the founders, it's incredible. And so it's to think that we are that close and you have incentivized everybody. Tim, as a matter of fact, I'm thinking about donating $13 million so I can be one up on you tonight. And I'm committed to doing that, ladies and gentlemen, as soon as I retire and get off welfare. Look, truly it's a great night, and General Boomer, Rusty, what a class evening this is. I mean, the whole thing is just first class, and I'm traveling tonight with my sidekick of 41 and a half years, and those of you that have been around me, I always make a point to introduce the First Lady of the Marine Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, Bonnie Amos, the First Lady of the Marine Corps. And Rusty talked about Sergeant Major Michael Barrett. Susan's not here with him tonight, but we've been traveling for the last really 3 days. And Sergeant Major Michael Barrett, 17 Sergeant Major, will you stand up, please? We're ladies and gentlemen, a real war fighter. When you're in the jobs we're in, you travel a lot together. I see more of him probably than I do just about anybody else. We just came back off all 3 days, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. But what I'd like to do is kind of share with you some information that Ron Christmas and I were talking about earlier today. We had an occasion to kind of catch up in preparation for tonight. And we were talking, after his second retirement. And you remember last year, or not too long ago, I was here and had the privilege of being a part of Ron Christmas's retirement. I was with Jack Daly a week ago at the Smithsonian, and we recounted the Blues Brothers again, General Christmas. But we were talking earlier today about Rusty and how it seems as though he is falling into this job quite well and has kind of settled into this second job after his military retirement, and that he kind of has it, for the most part, all figured out. And Ron was recounting, he says, it seems that Rusty and Ron and Jan Hewley, I saw Jan out here earlier, and I think Ed Usher's in the crowd. They all went fishing here just recently. And after an hour or so, the following conversation took place on the fishing adventure. Ron, you have no idea what I had to do to be able to come out fishing this weekend. I had to promise Sherry that I would paint every room in the house next weekend. Ed Usher, that's nothing, man. I had to promise Lee that I'd build her a new deck to our pool. Jan Hewley, man, you both have it easy. I had to promise Patty that I'd remodel the entire kitchen for her to be able to go fishing. Well, they continued to fish for a while, then they realized that Rusty hadn't said a word. So they asked him, hey, Rusty, you haven't said anything about what you had to do to be able to go fishing with the four of us here today. What's the deal, man? Rusty, all right. I just set my alarm for 04:30. When it went off, I shut off the alarm, leaned across the pillow and whispered in my best James Bond voice, Judy, you've been a good woman. I can either go fishing or we can have sex. Without even opening her eyes, she said in a sultry voice, wear a warm sweater, Rusty. Folks, it really is. I mean, honest to goodness, I love coming back here. I love being around you. I've met many of the founders over the last many years. I want to thank you for your fidelity. You know, that's one of the greatest words in our dictionary. It's not one we use often. It's in our motto, so we as Marines use it, but we don't hear it across our nation, and it means faithfulness. It means faithfulness almost to a fault. And that's what this effort is, and as you talked, Tim, tonight, and I was struck by several things. Number one, you're absolutely right. The generations of Marines that have worn our cloth that are alive today can't come into this museum and see what they did. And that's significant, and I've not thought about it that way. But I was also struck by the fact that you served between 1959 and 1962, and yet here it is in 2012. So you served those 3 to 4 years as a Marine, and then you got out, and you went to school, and you started your own business and highly successful. But that was a long time ago, and here we are in 2012, and you just stood up here and accepted the General John LeJejune Award, you and your fellow founders. And by the way, not all the founders in here came into the Marine Corps as officers, but what was it that caused them to continue, even if they served for 2 years or 4 years? What is it that causes them and you to come out a half a century later and continue to be always faithful? As I sit here as the Commandant and I travel across America and I run into wonderful Americans that continue, they serve for 2 years, and yet their heart and soul, you walk in their office, they were served 1968 to 1969 and 70 in Vietnam, and you walk in your office and you think you were walking in the Commandant's office in the Pentagon. All they have is Marine Corps memorabilia in there. I want to thank everybody for your great faithfulness. I think I can describe what happened here tonight by taking you to the trip that Sergeant Major Barrett, his wife Susan, and Bonnie and I just came off of. We spent the last 3 days on the East Coast of the United States. You see, we were determined that we were going to talk to every single officer and staff NCO. Now, the fact is, we know we missed a few. We missed some in Afghanistan. We'll catch those here in about a month and a half. And we knew we missed some that were on deployment at other places around. But it was not it's not as a result of a lack of effort. And we wanted to talk to them about who they are and where it all began. And it's very interesting because although we planned it this way, we planned the trip such that we'd start at Cherry Point and we'd go to Camp LeJejune, and then we'd go over to New River, and then we'd go down to Marine Corps Station Beaufort, and we'd talk to all the Marines. Then we'd go over to Parris Island. We knew we would end up yesterday morning at the headquarters watching at morning colors, and then an hour later watching almost 430 brand new recruits graduate. We knew that would happen. But the message we were bringing to our Marines, in light of all that you have seen in the newspaper and all the things that are out there today, and as you might imagine, you sit in this job and you take it personally. I take it personally because we have been on the ground between Iraq and Afghanistan, and depending on whether you talk right after 9/11 with Task Force 58, or whether it's March when we crossed the border in 2003. We've been on the ground for 8 to 9 to 10 years, and we fought hard. In fact, we did the math in preparation for our Senate and our House Armed Services posture hearings this year, and I asked the manpower folks, I want to know precisely how many Marines have deployed to Iraq. By the way, I'm not counting multiple deployments. I'm talking about individual Marines. So when they came to me, it was one Marine. I don't care whether you've been 5 times or not, but one Marine. It's over 277,000. In fact, when I testified, I gave them the exact number to the single-digit Marine. Over 277,000. We're over 146,000 right now in Afghanistan. Individual deployments of a United States Marine. And I reminded all the Marines as we traveled up and down the East Coast that 99.99% of those Marines have kept their honor clean. But I wanted to make sure that all the Marines that we talked to, the leadership, understood who we are, where we came from, and who we're not. Had a couple of slides that showed a few things to kind of feed the presentations. And the second one was the second page of the Commandant's Planning Guidance, and it's a picture of Marines at boot camp. And it talks about that indomitable spirit that Tim Day's talking about. It talks about our heritage. And it refers to the parade decks at Parris Island and San Diego and the hills of Quantico. And it talks about who they are and where they came from, and how that spirit was born into them in those parade decks. And at the very end of it, I said, what happens on those parade decks in the hills of Quantico is almost spiritual. Well, when we were writing that document during the summer, between the time I'd been nominated and the time I took office, my team was, when I got to that point, and I'd go up to Navy Annex each night and meet with them because I had a day job being the assistant commandant. And I'd meet with them and we worked through this page because it was important. I wanted all Marines to remember who they are because we're different. We're not the same. We're not weird. We're not outcast to society. We are society. But we are different. We're different than our fellow servicemen and women on our left and right that wear a different cloth. We are different. We are held to a higher standard. And I wanted Marines to understand that and unequivocally take that and teach that to their young Marines. So that term, it's almost spiritual, when I personally wrote that in there, and my team said, sir, what are you doing here? And I took them back to the meeting I had with Carl Mundy. And when you're going to be the commandant, you spend time with all the living commandants. There's 7 of them. Then I spent time with every single one. And to this day, I'm very close to 5 of the 7. We talk off and on via email, sometimes phone visits, almost, I would say, probably at least weekly or every other week. And I remember sitting with General Mundy, and he said, somewhere in the conversation, he said, Jim, let me tell you something. Actually, what he said was General. First time he'd ever called me by my rank, so I knew something was about to happen. And he said, General, let me tell you something. You are solely responsible for the spiritual health of the United States Marine Corps. Of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, let's see, I was born Catholic. I was kicked out of first grade by Sister Pauline. I became a Baptist when I was a lieutenant. And he looked at me, of course, he knew exactly what I was thinking, and he said, I'm not talking religion, General. I'm talking about what's inside of us, this sense of who we are, this ethos, this thing that resides inside of every single Marine that causes us to make the right decision when everybody wants to make the wrong decision, causes us to want to go this direction when everybody else wants to go that direction. It's exactly what Tim Day was talking about tonight. Those times when leadership requires somebody to stand up and say, Marines, we're going this way, or this is the right thing to do. He said, you're responsible for that. And then he threw in the kicker, and he said, General, if you fail at maintaining the spiritual health of the Marine Corps, and those were his exact words, you will have failed as the 35th Commandant. So I've told that story all the last 3 days. I wanted every officer and every Marine staff NCO to understand that, because that's what we're talking about, the spiritual health of the United States Marine Corps. So as we drove on to Parris Island on Thursday evening, it was about 1830, and we had, actually it was about 1700, and we had over in their new all-weather facility, we had every drill instructor, every staff NCO, and every officer in there. And we spent 2 hours with them. And we talked to them along the lines of what I've just described, only with a lot more information. But as we drove on the base that night, and I'd been on there, I've been stationed down at Beaufort 3 times, and spent a lot of time at Parris Island, but I hadn't been there in a while. So you're driving across the little causeway with the swamps, and the tide was out, and you could roll the windows down, and you could smell it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The palmetto trees, it was actually, for us, not the recruits, almost magical. And as we came through all that, did the roundabout, and then headed down towards Mainside, there across the road, and it's been there since I was Captain Amos, but there it is in big white letters, all refreshed. I think it's what used to be a big steam pipe that went across the road right out in front of the old exchange. But they built this massive, I don't know what you want to call it, sign, and it says, "We make Marines." It's huge. Covers the entire road. "We make Marines," and you drive underneath it. And I tell you what, I was thinking, this was Thursday. Moms and dads had arrived on Thursday. Graduation was Friday. They hadn't seen their son and daughter for 12 and almost a complete 13 weeks. Some went, the children, their young men and women went down there with the good graces and blessings of their families. Some went down there all by themselves because their families have disowned them. or their families didn't understand. But on that day, on that Thursday, I guarantee you, those families that came, and they came by the thousand, when they drove on that base and Thursday afternoon and said, my son or my daughter is graduating tomorrow, and they come down, and by the way, they all go to the exchange and they buy hundreds and hundreds of red T-shirts. It says, my son is a United States Marine, and the women get pink T-shirts that says, my daughter's a United States Marine. And bulldogs and stuff they put in their car. And then for the first time that evening, the night before graduation, they get to see their son or daughter. And can you imagine the change? And the change is almost spiritual. So as we talked to the drill instructors that night, and it was one of those moments as we drove through the gate, you felt your skin crawl because you knew that you were on hallowed ground. And so when we talked to the drill instructors that night, I talked to them about this sense of what takes place there. Of course, they know that. They see that. They put their fingerprints. There were 8 platoons that graduated yesterday. 8 platoons. 6 male and 2 female, and they look like $10 million. And they're the young Marines that are going to feed the force for the next decade and a decade after that. They're going to be the Tim Days of the future. They're going to be you. They're going to feed our Corps, and they are going to be those great young men and women that are going to live to keep our honor clean and to maintain the spiritual health of the Corps. I'll tell you what, when I left there yesterday, when Bonnie and I and Susan and Mike Barrett left Parris Island yesterday, we knew that we had been to the burning bush. I'd like to switch gears here with you for just a second and tell you 2 things. I mean, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of energy in the press about budgets, strategy, where are we? You've seen some accusations, which is unusual, that the Joint Chiefs are not being honest or faithful in their testimony. Surely we couldn't possibly be honest if we were going to be willing to downsize our forces or reduce our budgets. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind everybody in here that Joint Chiefs are tax-paying citizens just like everybody else is. We understand the economy. We live in it. And I want to assure everybody here of 2 things. Second one will be Afghanistan, where we're going. First one is there's not a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've got my brothers on that, all of us, to include the chairman, who's terrific, are all in one accord. We feel good about where we are. We believe in what's happened with the strategy. We helped write it. Regardless of what you read in the paper or you see in the press, we helped write it. We believe in it. We believe it's a good budget. We're not the least bit interested, and all those of you that have connections with Congress, I'll repeat it, we are not one bit interested in sequestration. So all of you people out there, go out there and tell your congressman to knock that off and stop that. But the Marine Corps came out of this whole effort in great shape. We are going to have a Marine Corps in the future when we come down from 202,000, which we cannot tolerate once we come out of Afghanistan. We don't have any business being that big. We're going to end up with a force that's a little bit smaller. It's going to be bigger than it was when the airplanes hit the building. It's going to be 100% manned, 100% equipped. It's going to have 100% of all the training and education and ammunition and professional military education it needs. It will be a well-trained force. So I feel very good about it. I want all the Marines in here to look me in the eye and trust me on this. Your leadership in the Corps that positioned it for the future in good stead. The second thing I want to tell you is that Afghanistan is going particularly well for the Marines. I always am careful to couch my portion of this as the helmeted province. But we just got back about a month and a half ago. We try to go every 3 months. I talked to the commander on the ground this morning on a BTC. Things are going notably well. 2 years ago, I stood at this right here. Ron Christmas is sitting right down where Walt Boomer is. And if you remember, those of you that were here, I made the comment, I said, Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Christmas's son, Brian, is leading the attack on Marja. We walked the streets of Marja a month and a half ago. No body armor on, no helmet. No body armor, no helmet. General Christmas, you need to tell Brian that when you come out of that combat outpost now, you don't have to serpentine your way out anymore. It's a paved road, street lights. The mayor, the provisional, the district governor took us down, held us by the hand, and walked us to where they were building the new high school. He's got 4,500 kids in the school, 500 little girls in the school, which is unheard of in Afghanistan. The place is open and booming for business. Ladies and gentlemen, you have every reason to be proud of your Marines and sailors in Afghanistan. I can't tell you how Afghanistan is going to turn out in the long haul, but what I can promise you is this, is that when we leave, we will have set the conditions such that the people in the Helmand Province have the greatest opportunity for success, just like we did in the Anbar Province in Iraq. I thought you'd fallen asleep. I started to clap myself. Okay. Listen, do you remember last year I read you a letter, a Dear John letter from a young Marine corporal in the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. How many of you, will you raise your hand if you remember me telling you that story? I could tell you that story again tonight. But those of you that weren't here last year, it's a story about a young Marine from 3-7 we met about 20 months ago. And he got a Dear John letter from his girlfriend, Becky. And it went on to talk about how, through his indomitable spirit, he was able to persevere. And I won't get into it because it's a wonderful story, and I think many of you in here remember it. As luck would have it, when we were in Afghanistan just a little bit ago, we were up in Sangin, and 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines is on the ground again. Young corporal, I won't tell you what his last name is, but his first name is Ricky. We ran into Corporal Ricky again, and there he was. And so Sergeant Major Barrett and I were very excited about seeing Corporal Ricky again, and of course he'd survived his Becky dumping him, and he'd come out the other end, and so I said, golly, Ricky, it's great to see you. And he said, sir, I said, what's happening with your love life? I mean, what's going on? So he said, sir, let me tell you. So I took notes, and I want to share it with you tonight because I know many of you have been very concerned about Corporal Ricky since the last time I spoke here. So you see, after Ricky returned from his last deployment, he met a great girl named Susie. He's been dating Susie now for a little over 6 months. Susie has very protective parents, so she never told them about Ricky. You see, she's a few years younger than Ricky, and she was hesitant to tell her parents that she was dating a Marine. You can't blame her. However, not too long ago, she announced, Ricky, Friday is my 18th birthday, and I want you to come over and meet my parents. And then Saturday, well, they're going to be going away for the weekend. And, well, this being my 18th birthday, Ricky, I really want to give you something very special. Ricky was ecstatic. And like all good Marines, he did his preparation for combat. The day of the dinner finally arrived. He went out, bought flowers for Susie, and bought candy for Susie's mom. Then he stopped by the pharmacy to buy a few items that he thought he might need. The pharmacist asked him, is this enough, or do you think you need more? Ricky kind of thought about it for a minute, and he says, you know, I think it's going to be a busy week, and so I think I'll take a few more. Later that evening, Ricky, excited, headed over to Susie's house, gave her the flowers and gave her mom the chocolates. A little bit later, Susie's father made it home finally, and they joined him at the dinner table. Wide-eyed, Ricky asked if he could say grace before meal. And then he sat there quietly for 10 minutes, almost in a meditative state. Susie kicked him under the table and leaned in and whispered, "Ricky, you never told me you were so religious." Ricky turned and whispered back to Susie, "Susie, you never told me your father was a pharmacist." Ladies and gentlemen, I love my job. I love being around the young men and women of our country, and especially those that wear this cloth. I'm honored to be in this great, this hallowed hall. And General Blackman and everybody else, thank you for the founders. Thank you for all you do for our Corps. God bless every one of you, and Semper Fidelis.
You pulled it off. Gentlemen, thank you for being a part of this tonight, and thank you for your exemplary leadership of our Corps. I think clearly, under your leadership, the spiritual health of our Corps will thrive and flourish. Thank you. And Bonnie, thank you. Thank you for all you do for Marines and Marine families and for their spiritual health as well. Thanks. And our thanks to each and every one of you. With your continued support, we will complete the mission and honor all Marines from 1775 to the present. Thank you for coming, and please have a safe trip home. Semper Fidelis.